session, the highest so far since Nigeria's independence in 1960. However, I do think the 2022-2023 statistics will even be more higher, because I personally know a lot of people who left Nigeria to study in the UK. A breakdown of the statistics shows that in the top 10 international students list, Nigeria is ranked third, China and India. Students overseas institutions. For instance, in 2021, Nigerian students and their dependents in the United Kingdom contributed an estimated £1.9 billion to the economy of the UK, according to a report by SBM Intelligence. So I did a quick search, and you can do the same, a quick Google search. Nigerian students in Canada, what are the figures? And then I got this one from the website of an educational institution that is, responsible for helping people travel to Canada and study. And the statistics does say the top 5 countries of origin for international students who study in Canada, or who studied in Canada as at 2022, were India with 226,450 students, China 52,165 students, the Philippines 23,280 students, France 16,725 students, and Nigeria 16,195 students. The same thing you will find in the United States. The new Open Doors report indicates that there was a 12.3% increase in the number of students from Nigeria studying in the United States for the 2021-2022 academic year. Now, the number is pegged at 14,438 Nigerian students, which is 33% of all African students studying in the United States. Now, there is this data that says, as at 2017, Nigerian students in Ghana were 71,000, contributing about $1 billion to the Ghanaian economy. So that's why I decided to invite Dr. Austen Sadu, who is a lecturer at the University of Uniport. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, Kalada.
So you heard me reel out all these statistics of foreign students, and trust me, some are listening to us right now and they are still planning on how to leave the country. With an average of about 1.67 million people writing JAM and UTME exams, or sitting for JAM and UTME exams every year. How do you think we can stop? We can't really stop, but how do you think we can make our tertiary institutions more attractive? Let's start from there. Good evening to you once again.
Well, thank you very much, Kalada. Let me, before I answer that question, directly say that migration is a natural phenomenon.
Okay.
The God who created the universe did actually not intend for there to be boundaries.
Okay.
So people are expected naturally to move from places of adverse condition to places where the pasture is greener. And it happens amongst animals and human beings. And that's why you see that amongst the animals, there's a specific or particular time of the year that they migrate one direction and move the other direction, and some other time according to the dictates of the weather or the environment.
Okay.
So it's a natural phenomenon. But what is happening in Nigeria today is beyond that natural phenomenon.
Okay.
If you listen carefully, as I said earlier on, you see that if it were natural, or if it was the normal form of migration, then it wouldn't be one or unidirectional. It has to be multi-directional. You have to go this way and that way. So the danger in Nigeria is that our students are moving out without other students coming in. And if that is the case, there must be a reason. There must be things that are making that to happen, because it's not natural that people won't come in while they go out alone. And so if you ask, what can we do to stem the tide? My simple answer will be change our policy in education. We have, as of today, over 140 private universities. And out of this number, we'll probably have about 96 public universities, and by that I mean both private, both federal government,
federal and state
government universities. The ratio of admission into this institution is about 5% to 95% in favor of the public universities. So while you have more private universities, you have them admitting less number of students. Where you have less number of public universities, they are admitting more of the students. And so, when you ask how do we deal with this challenge, as I said, you have to think about your policy. And what is that policy? The policy is that education has lost its position as a priority in our nation. In the early years of our development, education was a priority. And as you read out in those statistics earlier, you said Ghana had dedicated 23% of its national budget to education. That's an example of a country that prioritizes education. In the case of Nigeria, in the last 8 years, we have not had more than 5% of budget to education. But if you also know what happens with the budget in Nigeria, you know that we do not actually attain 70% budget implementation. So that will also tell you that perhaps out of the maybe between 5 and 6%, you probably will be having about 3.5 to 4% of the national budget realized for education in any particular year. And because we do not actually do evaluation of budget at the end of the year, we do not know the impact or the outcome of what we have put in the previous year. So we just continue blindly to do the same thing and expecting a different result. From the numbers you read out, if you have 21,000 or 16,000 or 14,000, as the case may be, of students, that's actually a university. You could have a university of that population. So it clearly shows that both for the private universities and the public universities, there are things that are actually not put in the right perspective for people, for those institutions to be attractive to students. In the case of the public universities, we see that we have dilapidated infrastructure. The sciences, for example, hardly have laboratories for students, and the library holdings in many of our universities are perhaps 10 to 15 years old. Even when you say that it's a virtual world, that you can do virtual library, the state of our infrastructure in communication and energy, that's electricity, also makes it absolutely impossible. And of course, you need to also subscribe to those libraries before your students or staff members can have access. So, generally, if we do not improve our funding, if we do not prioritize education, there's no way we're going to reverse the trend. And as you have rightly observed, we would rather have an increase in the number of students leaving this country to other countries. And in my view, I think that many of the people who are coming out of secondary schools and their parents have already made up their mind that Nigeria should not be a place to think about education, because there is no access. When you have education that ought to be a public good, and you see that there is discrimination in access, then it's easy to be, in practical terms, what it ought to be in the nation. And given the state of our development, we need to do something to turn around the tide.
All right, Dr. Sadu. Now we've got a commercial break coming up in about 3 minutes or 4 minutes. So I'm going to ask this question. Now, I've listened to you. You've talked about a change in policy. You've read out some of the challenges and how we don't prioritize education. But can I ask, in Nigeria, is our educational system structured to solve problems, because maybe that's one of the reasons why the government has not invested so much into the system. Is it structured to solve our societal problems? Because we hear knowledge is power, but we're not seeing knowledge at work. Or is it at work?
Well, when you prioritize education, you definitely will get a result. But if you fail to do that, the consequence is quite there, and that's what we are having. That's what we are faced with in this country. You don't have the result of research before you invest in research. You invest in research before you have the outcome of research, which will lead to development. So for you to move ahead, you have to put in money there. And I've always made this example since the year 2020. It was shocking that as at 2020, before the outbreak of coronavirus, there was not a university in this country that has a molecular biology laboratory in this country. So when the lecturers are forced to do the best they can through making up with internet and all that to guide students to getting the requisite experience or knowledge to perform in their desired professional area. But you need something you need to have access to the practicals, and that is not there. But if you see how Nigerians are performing when they leave this environment in other places, then you know that what we have given is actually not deficient. What the problem we have is, even for those who graduate from this environment, they also do not have opportunity of practicing their trade. And that is the secondary reason why people are leaving. How many of those people who go to study overseas, if it were just for the sake of getting education or improved knowledge, how many of them come back to this country to bring that knowledge to work here? Almost zero. So it must be that the access to improving your life, and we know that there are people who have gone through the university in this country, and in the last 10 years they have graduated, they don't have a decent job. And what do you see? You see government making Okada business, giving graduates Okada and counting it as job creation, and giving POS to young people and say, these are graduates who ought to be using their brain and whatever knowledge they gain in the university system to improve on the society. The access to doing that is simply not available. So it's not just about education. It's not just about the standard of education. And I've told people, the laws of physics, chemistry, natural science, mathematical rules, they don't change when they come to Nigeria. They are the same thing. But what changed is that students have access to do these practicals and improve on themselves. I know of a student who went overseas to do pharmacy, and right from the very first year, they were engaged in laboratories, and by the time they were finishing the first semester, and the candidate said, I can do
Dr. Sadu, I would have to pause you now so we can go for that commercial break. Please do stay tuned. Thank you.
Hey countryman, since I discover Kel Technologies, my suffer for printing don't end because Kel
Austen Sadu as my guest over the phone, and we've been talking about the state of education in Nigeria. And listening to him, he mentioned that what we learn here in Nigeria is not deficient, because when we travel abroad, what we've learned here is very useful, and we end up doing exceptionally well in other parts of the world. When we come back, from reading the headline news, I want to ask him, if he says it is not deficient, is he also saying that the curriculum that we use in Nigeria should not be updated, given the fact that we've seen abroad the curriculum there is slightly different, so to say? So we've seen younger people going into the tech industry. We've seen them studying things that we would usually study in the university in this part. When I come back, I've got many more questions. You want to stay tuned, and of course you would have a chance to contribute to the conversation that we are having.
This is 92.3
what is lead and all that. How do you determine news values and all that, newsworthiness? When you tell them all that, by the time they are in 400 level, they may come into a class where you're teaching that same topic, but you're telling them something different from what you have told them before.
Okay.
Is it that the principles are wrong? No. It's that person had moved from the fundamentals to a point of application.
Okay.
By the time you get to that level of application, there are things that you yourself will begin to question. I can give you an example from my own field. Every time we hear people tell us about media objectivity, oh, you have to be objective as a reporter. And when we go on conferences, people talk about it. Then after teaching for over 20 years, I've come to see that there is nothing like media objectivity. That is something I've got out for myself, not because I went to school or because my teachers taught me. It's because I've experimented on certain things and I've come to some conclusions. What is that platform that allows a Nigerian student to challenge any principle? There is no. So when they go out and see these things now and begin to do it, you see them excelling. And so algebra is algebra in Nigeria. It's going to be algebra in the United States.
Okay.
Velocity is going to be velocity in Nigeria. It's still going to be the same in UK. So whatever you do, whether you're in chemistry, you're doing volumetric analysis, or you're doing titration, but here you don't have access to those things.
Okay.
And let me tell you that part of the reason that we had that long strike in 2013 that led to the memorandum of understanding we signed with government was because government by itself set up a committee that went around to see that students were using stove. In universities, they were using stove as Bunsen burners. So what can, when you do a test in the laboratories, you need to put your heat at a certain level you can control. But you can't control the heat with your stove. You can't determine that this is how I want it, and when it gets to this point, it must be at a constant. So when you don't have that, how are you going to experiment? It is the experimentation that is the problem we have in Nigeria, not that the curriculum. And of course, there is no curriculum that is static anywhere in the world. Things are changing, and things have since evolved and changed. When we went to school, we used to get to, for any person doing communication-based thing, you must do typewriting. We don't teach students typewriting anymore because it's taken for granted that any person who is in secondary school today must have typing skills because computers are everywhere now. When we went to school, we were taught computer science and they would tell you it's a mainframe, it's big like this house. And it was only in our imagination. I have my children in primary school who are working on computer and they are better than me.
Okay.
So that is what happens. It's not because the curriculum is faulty or inferior. It's because the students have the opportunity to try things out and learn new skills.
All right.
And that is what we are lacking. And that's what funding will do for us in our education system.
Now quickly, because we don't have more time. Let's look at this too. Now I like the fact you have said application is what matters. Knowledge when applied is supposed to bring results. When we look at the statistics from Ghana as at 2017, where it was said that Nigerians are contributing about $1 billion to the Ghanaian economy through the educational sector, the recent report from the Punch says that Nigerian students and their families, because some of them go with their families, are contributing about £1.9 billion. Now, it means that education can be, or should I put it, our tertiary institutions can be a source of revenue for the country. How do we key into that one? First, that's the first question. The other question is, when we look at the way some of these other countries structure their tertiary institutions, the government has little or sometimes no hand in the funding of these schools. Are these things that we should begin to practicalize in Nigeria? That's the two questions I want us to be able to answer quickly, please.
I think you may have to remind me if I go off course with your first question, but okay. I think I need to start with the last question.
All right, quickly then.
I'm starting with that last question because it's a falsity that has been propagated by Nigerian leaders in this country. As far as I know, The only country that has the model that the leaders of this country are talking about is America, where you have education at that level so much privatized. I don't know of any other country.
Okay. What about the UK?
So no, UK is not as much as America, but of course you know that in Western culture there's really no difference between United Kingdom and America. But the difference is that what they lack in funding directly, they give a subsidy to the students. They give a facility to the students to deal with it. But I don't want to be carried away by the thought. I want you to understand. Now, if you tell me about Finland, if you tell me about Germany, if you tell me about Australia, if you tell me about even China, if you tell me about South Korea, I can go on and count countries where education is a priority. And so the level of your development will determine how you fund it. What should be more important in a developing country than education, in a developing country like Nigeria in education? Nothing. So if you were to spend 50% of your budget in education, you probably down the line, 5-10 years down the line, the multiplier effect of what you do will overcome what you have put in there, and you begin to make profit. But because the government is running away from the responsibility of doing its work, they tell us that education is not cheap. There's no way government alone can fund it. And I'm asking you, between taking Nigerians out of poverty, between giving Nigerians enlightenment and the tool to self-develop, and sending them out because you do not want, which one is better for us as a nation? And I think that it's better for us to put money here and develop our country through education, because whatever you get from that is going to turn around our situation. Of course, you've heard stories like Emagwali in Nigeria, and he left here, and he's been celebrated the world over as a genius in computer science. So what about the rest of the Emagwalis who didn't have opportunity of living here because there's no funding for education? So there is no alternative to funding education. And anybody who takes this idea that a government cannot fund education is not telling you the truth. I was just reading an article a while before we started this interview, and I see that a parliamentarian at the lower house in Nigeria takes over 9 million naira as wage every month. And you're asking yourself, with 9 million naira, you can do a lot for a department in any of the sciences. If you accumulate that for 1 year or for 6 months or even quarterly for that matter, you can do a lot. So what is the production? What is the production line of the parliamentarians in this country, other than the may have it and the yes have it? And in some cases, even when the yea and the nay to invest in the right places, we will have a commitment in there. And of course, as we talked about, a professor in Nigerian University, Federal University, earns less than 400,000 naira, right? Okay. And so when the professor says, "I'm not well paid, I need to have a living wage," government says, "If you don't want to take it, leave it." And the parents who feel they can afford to take their children overseas will say, "Oh, actually it's too, they're asking for too much." And you're asking that a professor who has spent at least 15 to 20, 30, 35 years in the system. Of course, when you get, after 10 years of becoming a professor, you hit the bar. That means you will never get promoted all through your stay in the system. So you probably be...
Can I ask my last question, because I'm out of time now? How then do we make the university system a revenue generating system?
University system is never a revenue generating system.
No. I just gave you an example. Where I said 1 billion realized in 2017 for Ghana.
No, it's not a revenue generating.
Okay.
I gave an example of what is happening there because Nigerians are going there to pay. It's not because it was designed to generate. And let me give you this. As a lecturer, I have come across some of our students that have gone overseas to get quick certificate and pay this money, and when they come here, they're almost useless.
Okay.
Because those countries have also learned that we are not funding our education, so they set up institutions for us, only for us. You go to some Eastern European countries, students in medicine are only allowed to study with mannequins, not cadaver. So when these things happen, they have discovered that we have neglected our responsibility, so they are harnessing it. Education is never a policy of revenue generating. Education is a place you put money to generate ideas, and the idea will now bring money. That idea is the relationship between town and gown. But if you don't have it first in the gown, you don't get it related or connected to the town where the money will come. And so there's no magic. There's no magic to it. And this fund you're talking about is what people are scratching from their hard-earned income because the system has failed them.
All right.
The system has failed them.
That's the much that we can take, Dr. Austen Sadu. Really, I appreciate your time. And let's do this again in the nearest future.
Thank you,
All right, then.
Thank you.
All right, stay tuned. Your contributions will come when it's the open season. For now, we've got a quick commercial, not a quick commercial, I should say, commercial break coming up next. After that, the news at 6, and we'll come back for the open season. Please do stay tuned to 92.3 Nigeria Info.
This is 92.3 Nigeria Info, the only place where talk is not cheap.
Welcome